Reaching the midpoint of life often feels less like a peak and more like a crossroads shrouded in fog. You might feel the weight of accumulated responsibilities or the unsettling quiet of paths not taken. The momentum that carried you through your younger years, it's no longer enough. This is a moment that demands a pause, a chance to recognize that the script for your future is yours to rewrite if you're willing to confront the uncomfortable reality of where you actually stand today. In this blink, you'll discover how to turn that uncertainty into a rigorous strategy for reinvention. You'll learn to apply the sharp, unsentimental tools of a business turnaround to your own existence, auditing your habits, defining a vision that goes beyond mere survival. By the end, you'll understand how to build a life engine that runs on resilience and creativity, equipping you to face the challenges of aging with renewed, unstoppable purpose. Let's meet the author, Matt Ross. For him, his midlife moment hit in 2011. It was as if a brutal, multi-front war threatened to dismantle his entire existence. Turning 50 forced a confrontation with mortality and purpose that most of us try to ignore. For Ross, that birthday coincided with a catastrophic convergence of personal and professional disasters. At home, his 16-year-old son Alex, who was nonverbal and severely autistic, suffered a complete psychiatric breakdown. This was a terrifying descent into chaos, Alex screaming, inconsolable, eventually requiring hospitalization. The helpless agony of watching a child suffer, unable to communicate their pain, is trauma that reshapes a parent's soul. While his family life was fracturing, the professional ground gave way too. Ross had spent years building School of Rock from a struggling startup into the leader in music education. He'd sold the company to a private equity firm to fuel its growth, a strategic move that seemed sound at the time. The reality of the transition was harsh. The new owners brought in a management style that clashed with the culture Ross had built, and his exit was swift and painful. Stripped of the title and daily purpose that had defined him for years, he found himself adrift. This brings us to what Ross calls the grow or fold binary. We tend to assume life flows in a continuous stream, but midlife often presents a stark choice. Folding is the default, passive reaction to overwhelming stress. It means accepting decline, letting trauma define you, retreating into bitterness and stagnation. It means allowing external factors, job loss, a child's illness, aging parents, to dictate your internal state. Growth, on the other hand, is a survival mechanism. Ross realized that while he had zero control over his son's biology or the decisions of a private equity board, he retained complete control over his response. Succumbing to the mountain of issues would only lead to a downward spiral. So, instead of folding under the pressure of 2011, he decided to treat his life with the same strategic rigor he'd apply to a failing business. He looked at the chaos as a turnaround project, requiring a complete reinvention of his operating system. This mindset shift is where anyone feeling the walls close in can begin. It requires acknowledging that the strategies which got you here are insufficient for the challenges ahead. By viewing his life through this lens, Ross moved from vulnerability to agency. He understood that surviving meant actively designing a new future rather than passively awaiting his fate. That's the choice when the storm hits. Let the wind tear you apart, or adjust your sails and use the crisis as fuel for what comes next. Once you've made the conscious decision to stop folding and start growing, the immediate impulse is often to grab the wheel and steer wildly towards something new. But you can't plot a course to a new destination if you're lying to yourself about where you currently stand. Before any strategy can work, you have to strip away the self-deception that builds up over a lifetime and ruthlessly audit your reality. So how do you actually do that? Ross treated his own life like a failing business that needed a forensic audit. He began with what he calls a personal inventory, a diagnostic tool designed to score his satisfaction across categories like social health, physical well-being, and family relationships. The results were sobering. He discovered he was operating at a mere 30% capacity in his social health. The guilt of his son's condition and the pressure of his career had caused him to isolate himself, eroding the very support networks he needed to survive. Seeing a number that low became a confrontation with the fact that his so-called coping mechanisms were actually acts of self-sabotage. This same auditing process extended to his career, and here Ross discovered a trap that many people fall into: the dysfunctional safe zone. This is professional purgatory where you remain in a role simply because you're competent at it and it pays the bills, even though it no longer feeds your soul. We often get stuck in careers chosen by our 20-year-old selves, afraid to pivot because we confuse tenure with purpose. To escape this zone, Ross used what he calls a good at, love to do matrix, visualizing his professional life in quadrants. The goal was to identify the holy grail box, the intersection of high competence and high joy. Through this exercise, he realized that while he was excellent at corporate management, he loathed the bureaucracy. His true holy grail lay in building culture and developing creative talent. Now we've established what Ross was good at and what he loved, but all of this naturally leads to a deeper question. What is it all for? This is where the purpose inventory comes in. A purpose isn't a job title or a label like father or CEO. Those are roles you play. Without a clear purpose, you're rudderless, making decisions based on reacting to crises rather than steering towards a vision. Ross distilled his entire existence down to a single clarifying sentence: to be positive and help people find their magic and creative inspiration. This became a ruthless filter for decision-making. If an opportunity didn't serve that specific mission, it was discarded. By crystallizing this purpose, the chaos of the crisis began to organize itself into a coherent path, setting the stage for a concrete plan of action.
Defining your purpose gives you a destination, but a destination without a map? That's just a daydream. Waking up with a mission statement feels empowering, sure, but it doesn't solve the psychiatric crisis in your living room or put money in the bank. To bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be, you have to move from philosophical introspection to hard-nosed strategic planning. For Ross, this meant creating a document that would serve as the operating manual for his next decade, a framework he called the MVP-10. The MVP stands for Matt's vision plan, and the 10 represents a 10-year horizon. That specific time frame matters because it forces you to lift your gaze above the immediate fires and look toward the long game. When you're drowning in emergencies, managing a family health crisis, scrambling for work, your vision naturally narrows to survival mode. The MVP-10 demands the opposite. It asks you to articulate exactly where you want to be in 10 years, turning vague aspirations into non-negotiable targets. Think about the weight of the goals Ross had to commit to paper. This wasn't about buying a vacation home. His first and most urgent priority was to create a long-term, sustainable solution for his son's disability. He needed to ensure that when Alex turned 21 and aged out of the school system, a world-class organization would be ready to support him. That goal dictated everything else, including his second target, financial abundance. He needed resources to secure his family's future when he could no longer do the heavy lifting himself. So now we have a 10-year vision, but a vision plan can easily become a static document gathering dust if it isn't broken down into execution steps. This is where SMART goals come in, making every objective specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You can't just write "get healthy" and hope for the best. For Ross, facing metabolic syndrome and immense stress, health had to be operationalized. It meant scheduling therapy, committing to physical training, altering his diet. By converting the 10-year vision into granular daily actions, the overwhelming mountain became a climbable series of steps. This brings us to a distinction worth sitting with: strategic versus tactical thinking. Most of us spend our lives trapped in tactical mode, reacting to emails, putting out fires, making decisions based on short-term relief. We become impatient, seeking quick fixes for deep-rooted problems. Strategic thinking works differently. It's consistent, forward-looking, and involves making difficult decisions today that may not pay off for years. By anchoring himself to this strategic plan, Ross could weather daily volatility without losing his bearing. He moved from being a passenger on a chaotic ride to the architect of his own path, ensuring every tactical step was a brick in the road toward that 10-year vision. With the map drawn and the destination set, only one variable remained: the physical and emotional energy required to drive the machine forward. A strategy is just a wish list if the system executing it is broken. You can have the most detailed 10-year plan in the world, but if your body is failing and your mind is clouded by anxiety, that plan will collapse under the weight of the first crisis. Ross engineered a support system he calls the 3 legs of the stool, a triad of functional, emotional, and creative growth designed to keep the engine running when the road gets rough. Let's start with the first leg, functional growth. Think of this as hardware maintenance for your life.
As we age, our factory settings of the youth no longer sustain us. Muscle mass diminishes, cognitive speed can falter without active intervention. For Ross, this was about capacity. He realized he couldn't handle a high-stress turnaround if he was physically depleted, so he treated his health with the same discipline he applied to his business finances. This meant rigorously scheduling sleep, exercise, and diet, viewing them as non-negotiable operational requirements. It also included what he calls sharpening the toolkit, a commitment to continuous learning so his professional skills wouldn't atrophy in a changing marketplace. Now that we've covered the hardware, let's talk about the software, emotional growth. Without a filter, our minds can become clogged with negativity, especially during a crisis. To combat this, Ross developed the bookshelf metaphor for emotional regulation. It works like this. Picture your mind as a room. When a terrifying thought enters, like fear of a son's future or a business failure, instead of engaging with it and letting it spiral, you acknowledge it and mentally place it back on a shelf. This simple visualization allows you to conserve your energy for things you can actually influence, rather than burning out on things you cannot. This practice turns optimism from passive hope into a trained muscle. So we've got hardware maintenance and software updates. The final leg might be the most surprising: creative growth. We often dismiss creativity as a luxury for artists or children, but Ross argues it's the X factor for aging well. It turns out that engaging in creative acts, whether drawing, writing, or playing music, does something powerful to the brain. It enhances neuroplasticity and cognitive flexibility, the very traits needed to solve complex life problems. It's all about having fun, and Ross urges adults to shed the heavy coat of self-criticism that stops them from trying new things. By reclaiming this sense of play, you don't just make art, you make yourself more adaptable, turning the act of creation into a shield against the rigidity of age. With the hardware tuned, the software patched, and the creative spark ignited, the system is finally ready to run, and this time, it's built for the long game.
Remember the binary choice from earlier sections? It never goes away. Ross describes happiness and success as a jagged line, filled with peaks of triumphs and valleys of brutal challenge. The goal isn't to flatten that line. The goal is developing the resilience to ride its spikes without losing your footing. Even after selling his companies and stabilizing his family life, the work didn't end. He acknowledges that the work never stops, but neither does the opportunity for discovery. You are never done growing. Every single day presents a fresh choice: retreat into the comfort of the known or step into the friction of the new. By choosing growth day after difficult day, you don't just survive midlife, you turn it into the most vibrant, consequential era of your existence. The encore, it turns out, can be louder than the main set. In this blink, To Grow or Fold by Matt Ross, you've learned that midlife is a critical binary decision point, a moment where you must actively choose to reinvent your strategy or accept stagnation. You discovered that this reinvention requires a forensic audit of your current reality, stripping away the safe but dysfunctional habits cluttering your personal and professional life. You learned to bridge the gap between where you are and where you need to be using the MVP 10 framework, a 10-year strategic plan that converts abstract dreams into specific, non-negotiable targets. And you explored the necessity of maintaining a three-legged stool of functional health, emotional resilience, and creative expression to sustain this path, ensuring you don't simply endure the challenges of aging, but use them to build a life of joy, impact, and continuous reinvention. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. See you in the next Blink.